right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Clean Air Council's virtual Greenfest presented by Toyota Hybrids. I'm Kamali Alloway, and I'm very excited to be here with Andrea Vettori, the Executive Director of Sanctuary Farm, for this live stream on urban agriculture and the environment impacts on marginalized communities. Greenfest Philly is the area's largest environmental festival. We've been celebrating all things sustainable for the past 15 years. And this year, as I'm sure everybody is not surprised, we are doing a completely virtual event with programming scheduled through this Sunday. So we have today and tomorrow programming still, and you can check out what's coming up at cleanair.org/Greenfest. And with that, I will turn it over to Andrea for this great presentation.
Okay, can you hear me, Kamali?
Yep.
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining us today and giving up some time on your Saturday morning to discuss what I really think is an important topic of urban agriculture and how it can help to heal our environment in the city and how that's particularly helpful to those who are marginalized in the city. My name is Andrea Vettori, and I am a nurse practitioner by profession and a farmer by passion. As a nurse practitioner, I have worked for roughly 30 years with marginalized communities, and in particular to those who have been struggling with homelessness and substance abuse. As a gardener and a beekeeper, I've come to really appreciate over the years just how much nature can heal. And it's been a dream of mine to really provide that healing to folks who otherwise don't have that opportunity to experience gardening firsthand. So we'll talk a little bit more in the program about Sanctuary Farm. But we've been around since 2017. That's when we first started. So today what I'd like to do, again, is I'll give you a little history of Sanctuary Farm, talk a little bit about the community where the farm is located in Charswood and North Central parts of Philadelphia. We'll discuss just briefly kind of the timeline of urban development and how that intersects with urban agriculture over the last several years. And then the heart of what we'll talk about really is the environmental issues that cities are dealing with and how urban agriculture can help to mitigate some of the problems that cities are dealing with. This is a map of the area in North Philly where our farm is located. We started, again, I said in 2017 with one site right here at the corner of 24th and Berks. And we have two additional sites that we expanded to over the last 2 years at the corner of 22nd and Cecil B. Moore. And we soon will have a fourth site on the opposite side of 24th and Berks, where we will be constructing a hoop house and be able to grow produce all year round for the people in this community. So as you can see, we're sort of right in the heart of North Philadelphia. Temple borders us on the east side, Brewery Town and the park over here on the west side, Fairmount down at the bottom, and then Strawberry Mansion up here at the top. This community is really one of the poorest communities in Philadelphia. And the people in these communities struggle with incredible rates of poverty. The median income is $18,800. And just to put that in context for folks, the poverty level in Philadelphia, or in the country rather, for a family of four is $26,200. So it really is significant in this part of the country, or in this part of the city. The neighborhood where the farm is located is this 19121 section of the city, where 39% of the people live below the poverty line. These other zip codes are zip codes that that we service. We really try to keep good data about the people that come to the farm and come to the produce stand. And these are the main zip codes that that we service. And you can see that a significant portion of the population live below the poverty line, with the 19133 area being really the worst. And not surprisingly, because of the poverty, the unemployment rate also is pretty significant. So 16.5% unemployment rate, which is significantly below the average unemployment rate in Pennsylvania as a whole. And this number, I might add, was pre-COVID. So today that number would be significantly higher. In addition to really struggling with poverty and unemployment, the crime rate in this neighborhood is really devastating the people that live in this community. And it is ranked third in violent crimes in all of Philadelphia. And I can tell you, from being out at the farm, there is not a day that goes by where multiple cop cars fly by with their sirens going, ambulances. And, there are these people growing up and living in this environment are experiencing rates of trauma and stress that most of us can not even imagine. And what we're learning in healthcare now is that years of dealing with trauma from childhood through adulthood and the chronic stress that comes along with that contributes not only, as you can imagine, it would contribute to increases in mental illness, increases in anxiety, depression, but also what we're finding out is that living with chronic stress over the years also increases rates of chronic physical illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, obesity. And that's something that really we're just starting to understand more fully. So not surprisingly, this area ranks second, the second worst in Philadelphia for things like diabetes, heart disease, and obesity, and very tragically, first in Philadelphia for childhood obesity. And when we think about chronic stress, I don't know that we fully appreciate the stress of living in environments that look like this day in and day out, walking past areas of the city, of your neighborhood that look like this. So Sanctuary Farm, just a little bit about who we are and what we do. Our mission at Sanctuary Farm is to address the health inequities resulting from systemic racial oppression and economic injustice by converting abandoned and neglected areas into spaces that promote safety, hospitality, nutrition, and growth. We are really about healing. I like to tell people that I really think of our farms as an alternate form of healthcare. And that's really the context that we sort of approach every day when we're out at the farm. So we're not just looking at produce as a means of improving physical health, which certainly that's sort of our entry point right into the community, but we're also looking at emotional health, spiritual health, communal health, and then of course, environmental health. So what we do is we take sites that look like these and convert them to sites that look like this. And that simple act of just changing that landscape does volumes to improve people's health. And I know we're talking about environmental health, but all things are, I have a social work background and I really come at things from a systems sort of approach. And you have a change in one system and it affects another system, and they're all interconnected. So there was a study done by the University of Pennsylvania a few years back that looked at greening spaces, greening empty lots in Philadelphia, and just taking a beat up, abandoned, trash strewn urban lot and turning it into a green space, and not even this, what we're doing, but just planting grass, putting up a little fence, and the benefits that that has to people's emotional health. And they actually proved that people had a decrease in self-reported depression rates just by changing that landscape. So in our 4 years, and we actually haven't tallied all of the produce this year, but we have produced somewhere around 12,000 pounds of produce from our 3 lots. And what we do with that produce is we make it available to people in the community, either low cost, at a low cost stand, or this year, because of the pandemic, at a no cost food stand. And additionally, we partner with health centers in the community to teach nutrition. We have a program called Veggie Scripts where we provide prescriptions to the health providers. They give those to their patients. The patients come and redeem those prescriptions for produce at our stand. We also are committed to improving employment opportunities for people particularly struggling through homelessness and substance abuse. And so we do provide jobs for folks in the community. Specifically, we partner with Project Home through their employment program and through their high school internship program to help young kids who are at risk of becoming homeless learn some skills that will benefit them later in life. We also partner with summer classes, summer camps, and after school programs to provide education around healthy eating, gardening, environmental topics, and the like. So this is just meant to kind of give you a sense of the changing landscape of not only the urban landscape, but how the changing urban landscape has really affected the community garden movement. And as we move from an industrial era into a post-industrial era, where manufacturing jobs gave way to service sector jobs, we see with that decline in the population across cities all over the nation. And with that, unwanted and abandoned property, decrease employment, white flight, and all of the problems that come along with that. Urban agriculture has risen and fallen in popularity throughout the years. Most notably are the victory gardens during World War II, where people were encouraged to plant gardens not only to feed themselves, but also to help feed the troops. That lost popularity after World War II because of some of the changing demographics. And then we began to see a rise in popularity again around the 80s and 90s during that post-industrial era where we had a lot of, and still have, abandoned properties and a decrease in population. If I were to expand this timeline out further to today, Philadelphia is one of, along with some other cities like Detroit in the country, is one of the leaders in terms of the agricultural movement. We have in Philadelphia for the first time created the Office of Urban Agriculture. And with that, we also have an urban agricultural plan. So the city of Philadelphia really does recognize the importance of urban agriculture in terms of dealing with some of the issues of the environmental issues and the declining population and the abandoned lots in the city. Not only that, at the federal level, the federal Farm Bill has designated and earmarked money towards urban agriculture in the Farm Bill. So last year, that money from the federal Farm Bill trickled down to the state's departments of agriculture, And specifically in Pennsylvania, many of us in Philadelphia here received money from Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture and that I mentioned our hoop house that we'll be building hopefully later this year. That came from money from the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. So there really has been a dedication in Philadelphia to deal with some of these issues and specifically to incorporate urban agriculture into that planning. So what are some of the environmental issues that are facing not only Philadelphia, but all of the cities across the country? And this is obviously no surprise to anybody on this call, but we'll be looking at these issues here of polluted land, poor quality land, polluted waterways from runoff, increasing city temperatures, and poor air quality. And so we'll look at these and look at ways in which urban agriculture and community gardening in particular can help mitigate against some of the effects of these issues. And again, in particular, how these issues affect some of the inner city poor. So polluted land. In Philadelphia, we have roughly 3,000 acres worth of abandoned and vacant property and about 42,000 vacant lots across the city. This area represents the area where our farm is located, and the green in this picture represents the vacant lots in this neighborhood alone. So this is roughly what, a 1 or 2 mile area, and you can see all of the vacant lots in the city. And lots of reasons why vacant lots pose a significant environmental challenge in the city. Philadelphia, to begin with, has a soil that's a heavy clay soil, so very thick and very dense to begin with. When you combine that with the debris that's left over from the buildings that were demolished, and what happens when these buildings are demolished is they take off most of the trash and dump it in a landfill, but what remains is plowed under and into the soil, making a much more dense and compacted soil. And in that soil, not only is that soil poor quality soil because of obviously the debris that's in there, but because it's compacted, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that's an issue, but it's also full of contaminants. So you've got heavy metals that are notoriously in all of the lots in the city of Philadelphia. So lead, cadmium, zinc, and all of the health problems that go along with those pollutants. As I mentioned, the compact soil is really the issue, one of the biggest issues in terms of abandoned lots. The animated picture at the bottom of your screen shows why this is an issue. So the picture on your right here is an urban lot that has been compacted, whose soil has been compacted over the years from buildings, from the weight of the building to begin with. And then when those buildings again are demolished and plowed under, it just compacts the soil even further, prohibiting these roots from really penetrating deep down into the soil, as opposed to the picture on the left, which is a more healthy soil landscape. The problem with this is pretty obvious. You either have no growth, where just nothing can grow in this compacted soil, or you have very poor vegetation, weeds, and invasive species that crop up. Obviously, with abandoned lots, we also see increase in crime rate. So when you have lots, go back one picture here. So this kind of an abandoned lot not only attracts more crime in the area, but it also attracts more dumping. So how can urban agriculture help to mitigate some of these issues? By simply converting an abandoned lot into this green space that you see here at the bottom of the picture and putting up a fence, the studies have shown that the crime rate in those areas drops significantly. There's less likely to be dumping in those areas because people see the fence, they assume that that's someone's property, and they avoid dumping in there. It increases the home value, and that I just want to highlight is a bit of a controversial benefit. Some would see it as a benefit, some would see it not as a benefit in terms of the potential for gentrification, and that could be a whole nother topic. But I do think it's important to put that in there, and I think it's important for those of us who are working in urban agriculture to just really understand that all of our good efforts could lead to something like gentrification and really harming the people who've lived in those neighborhoods for years. In terms of the polluted land, one of the most important things that urban agriculture can do is remediate the soil by adding organic matter or compost. Compost, it has been shown, can bind to heavy metals and other volatile compounds that are in the soil and prevent those compounds and those pollutants from being washed away and polluted, going right into our waterways. And they can also stop those compounds from being absorbed into the plants themselves by binding to them. And it's really fascinating to appreciate how much compost can really clean our soils. There's a whole area of this called Phyto Remediation, where we're using plants to clean some of the brownfields, so some of those areas that are so heavily contaminated that they pose significant health and environmental hazards. And they're starting to experiment with plants like mustards, willow trees, poplar trees, Indian grass, and sunflowers to help clean those soils. And just to give you one example of how significant that can be, 1 month old sunflower has been shown to absorb 95% of area that's contaminated with uranium in a 24-hour period. So just let that sink in for a second. I mean, that is just hugely significant for all of the land in the country in terms of cleaning that land. So again, urban agriculture can really help clean the soil in significant ways. Polluted water has been probably one of the biggest challenges for cities to deal with, and Philadelphia has certainly not escaped that problem. Most of the surfaces, or almost most of the surfaces in an average city is impervious. So 45% of all of the surfaces in an urban environment are impervious to water. So when rain hits those surfaces, they run off of those surfaces. They do not get absorbed into the ground. They're taking with them all of the various physical pollutants, contaminants, chemicals, and that water is going right into our water systems, our waterways. Vacant lots contribute to that. A vacant lot that has been compacted because of the debris that we mentioned earlier is 60% impervious. So it's almost nearly as impervious as the sidewalks surrounding it. So 60% of the surface area of this lot here is impervious. Now, converting that to a green space where you're adding some organic matter and you're growing grass, it improves that significantly. Another major factor to water runoff are the rooftops within the cities themselves. So if we look at the combined results of the impervious structures within the city, So the rooftops, the inability of the soil to absorb water. So the runoff that you get from the impervious structures, the combined runoff for an urban environment is about 55%. So 55% of the rainfall just runs right off of the land and goes right into our waterways, again, taking all of those physical and chemical contaminants along with it. When we compare that to a natural environment, we see that there's more water that's evaporated. There's more water that's absorbed into the soil, and that results in significantly less runoff in the urban environment, or in the natural environment as opposed to the urban environment. And that doesn't even take into consideration the water that's absorbed into the green vegetation in the natural environment. Another large problem in Philadelphia and in other major cities as well is the wastewater. Philadelphia has what's called a combined sewage system, where water from sewage, raw sewage, water from stormwater all get combined into one sewage pipe, and that in the best of times, that combined sewage is sent to a treatment plant. We also, however, have what's considered a combined sewage overflow, and that structure was really meant in times of when we have heavy rainfall, and this combined sewage overflow cannot withstand or absorb the amount of rainfall that's falling. To prevent that combined sewage from ending up back on the streets and posing a health problem, we have these combined sewage overflow pipes where the raw pollutants, the raw sewage, all of the environmental contaminants that the rainwater is taking with it as it hits the ground is flowing out directly into our waterways. This is a picture of one of those combined sewer overflow outlets releasing water into the waterways in Philadelphia. So all of this water that's coming out of here has with it raw sewage and any pollutants or contaminants that it has picked up along the way. The Philadelphia Inquirer did a really nice article about a year ago where they looked at 1 year period of time from July 2017 through July 2018, where and they found that 12.5 billion gallons of wastewater ended up in our waterways, which is a pretty awful thing to really think about. And these are the same waterways that our children are playing in all the time. Now, as I mentioned, Philadelphia does a great deal in terms of cleaning the city and greening the city. And Philadelphia had a pretty ambitious goal in 2007 with what they called the Green Works Clean Water Program. And the goal was greening 1/3 of all of the impervious structures over the next 20 years into green spaces. Now, it wasn't until just recently that urban agriculture, and specifically in the form of community gardens, was really incorporated into the urban planning. So it just wasn't thought of. So when cities were looking at greening the spaces, they looked at green industry. So porous pavements, green rooftops, stormwater planters, rain barrel programs, all wonderful. Fantastic programs. And Philadelphia actually used this metric of what they called a green acre, and to show that if they can prevent 80 to 90% of the rainfall from reaching the sewer systems in one greened acre. And as I mentioned earlier, Philadelphia has 3,000 acres of vacant property. So just imagine if 1 acre can reduce 80 to 90% of that water reaching the sewer system, if we were to even take a small percentage of those 3,000 acres and convert them into urban gardens, how much cleaner our water systems would be. In 2000, Philadelphia partnered with the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society in what they referred to as the Vacant Lot Program. And this just took, it was a very simple measure. They took abandoned lots in the city. They removed all of the debris. They removed all of the poor vegetation, put down some compost and grass seed, erected a simple wooden fence around it, and that helped decrease the stormwater runoff by 30%. Just that small measure alone helped to really significantly decrease the water runoff. Another topic or another intervention that cities were looking at were green roofs. And when we talk about green roofs, it's important to understand there's two different types of green roofs. There's what's known as extensive and intensive green roofs. So extensive green roofs have a much shallower soil base. They use drought-resistant plants like sedum to absorb the water. And they're essentially low maintenance. This is really what was referred to in the early days when we talked about green roofs. There's no public access, low maintenance, really easy to maintain. They do a great job of absorbing water. But now we're looking more at intensive green roofs. These have a deeper soil level. They have more crop diversity. They do need more maintenance to upkeep it, but they do a lot better job of preventing water runoff than the traditional green roofs. So, and why is that? So when you look at, it's really about the types of plants that are grown and the depth of the soil. So sedums, which are usually used in the green roofs, allow for the most water runoff of all of the plants that are utilized, as opposed to tall grasses and your broadleaf plants, which will typically see more in community gardens and more urban garden rooftops. The water from, as we mentioned earlier, from the plants are going into the soil, staying into the soil longer, and so they're not running off the rooftops, they're getting absorbed through the plant. The broad leaves of the plants are capturing some of the rainfall, holding that rainfall, and that rainfall then is evaporating from the roofs or from the plants. So if we take that, there's not been a whole lot of studies that have been done on community gardens in terms of water runoff. But if we just take those concepts that we've mentioned earlier and we translate that down to the urban garden, it's easy to show that there is much more or less water runoff in an urban typical city community garden than on the rooftops. And some of the reasons for that are there's a lot more compost that's used. And we talked earlier that compost in the soil, when added to the soil, really helps to aerate that soil. It also invites microorganisms into the soil, in particular invites earthworms into the soil. And as your earthworms travel through the soil, they create these tunnels that then allow for more rainwater to travel through the soil and prevent that water from running off. In the same way, your root systems create similarly those types of tunnels in two ways. The roots of a live plant absorb the water that's in the soil, again, preventing that water from running off. And then when the plants die, the roots that are remaining under the soil are decomposed by the microorganisms that are in the soil, And then what you have left behind again are more tunnels. So the soil becomes much more aerated, and the infiltration rate, the combined infiltration rate of that is increased by 10 times. In addition to composting, urban gardens often will collect rainwater. It is very common for community gardens throughout the city to collect rainwater. And a 1,000 square foot rooftop in the city can capture 6,000 gallons of water from 10 inches of rain. We have in Philadelphia on average 47 inches of rainfall a year. That would translate for a 1,000 square foot rooftop to 28,200 gallons of water being captured and not falling into the waterways. Imagine if all of the gardens throughout the city created more of these water catchment areas and prevented that water from running off and just draining out down into the soil or into the city waterways. How much more pollutants we could capture and prevent from ending up in our water. This is a comparison of the water runoff measured in cubic feet per second in 3 different types of structures. So this was a study done in 2009 by University of Pennsylvania. And you can see on the left that your typical city buildings have an average water runoff of 80 cubic feet per second compared to vacant lots, which have a rainwater runoff of 21 cubic feet per second, and then community gardens with the best 818.3. And I would add that these vacant lots are vacant lots that were greened. So these were vacant lots that were not the original trashed kind of vacant lots with the heavy compacted soil. These were vacant lots that were converted into just green spaces. So if we were to look at the lots before that, I would imagine that the water runoff rate would be significantly higher. So increased temperatures in the city. I don't need to tell anybody that who lives in Philadelphia or any major city that it is much hotter in the city than it is in the surrounding areas. This phenomenon is known as the urban heat island effect. And what we know is that the pavements in the city absorb solar energy. We have waste heat from buildings and vehicles contributing to that heat. And then the other thing that's happening is the tall buildings in the center city areas, the space between those tall buildings are trapping the heat in the city. And all 3 of those things combine to create this urban heat island effect that we refer to. And what's also happening in the city is that heat that's trapped during the day is slowly being released into the environment at nighttime. And so you don't have the typical cooling that's happening, that's happening in the suburban and rural areas that you would have, that you would normally have at nighttime in the city. So you've got not only temperatures that are hotter in comparison during the day, but also temperatures that are not getting that normal relief of the heat in the evening. These are some satellite images from NASA, and this one in purple and pink is what's called a thermatic mapper. This shows the heat difference between your urban area and the rural and suburban areas around it. So your dark purple represent cooler temperatures, and as you travel closer into the city area, the lighter colors represent the hotter temperatures. This picture here represents the city structure. So the paved structures and the buildings in the city. And if you were to overlay these two maps, you can see the outline of the building's structure is exactly the same as where your hotter temperatures are. And then the opposite is true for this one over here, which just shows your green spaces in the dark green and no vegetation over here in the lighter areas. And again, those maps are identical if you were to overlay them. So where are some of the hottest city temperatures in relation to the surrounding areas? Right here in Philadelphia, unfortunately. So the I-95 corridor from Boston to DC registers the highest urban temperature relative to their surrounding areas. So when you think that Philadelphia is hot, you are not imagining it. It truly is. The CDC, CDC mentions that 2,700 deaths occur annually in the years between 2004 and 2018. And this is particularly troublesome and problematic for our most vulnerable population. So the inner city poor, they have no way of necessarily getting away from the heat in many circumstances. Infants, because of their small body size, are more susceptible to dehydration. Children don't feel the high temperatures as well as the elderly who can't mitigate the temperatures within their body. And more so the mentally ill and folks who are struggling with homelessness and substance abuse are particularly vulnerable to the high temperatures within the city. So it's, you know, folks in the inner city and folks of little resources may not have air conditioning, they may not have fans, and so they are particularly vulnerable when we begin to talk about hot urban temperatures. The increase in energy demand is another significant problem for cities. So it's shown that 1 degree increase in temperature in the city or anywhere can lead to a 5 to 20% increased demand for air conditioning. So how can urban agriculture help with this urban heat island effect? The University of Manchester study found that a 10% decrease or increase in green space can lead to a corresponding decrease in surface temperatures up to 4 degrees Celsius. And in Central Park, it's been registered, there is a 9 to 18 degree cooler air inside Central Park relative to the temperatures in the surrounding city. A 2004 study that looked at green roofs relative to non-vegetative roofs found almost more than double temperature increase in your non-vegetative roofs. Tree covers are another way that cities can manage some of the heat. And we all know that it is cooler when you're sitting on a hot day underneath a tree. And the tree cover can lower temperatures by about 10 degrees. But if you're looking at that across an entire city, it really takes about 40% coverage to get that 10-degree difference throughout the city. So tree coverage, using trees throughout the city as a way of reducing the heat may not be the most practical plan. Community gardens, on the other hand, can really help to create some cooler environments. And they do that in a number of different ways. So the soil underneath the plant leaf structure is cooler because of the shade that those leaves provide. The deeper soil is providing insulation and maintaining cooler temperatures. And then there's this concept called evapotranspiration that happens with plants, where it's sort of a combination of the evaporation that happens and also the plants essentially breathing or transpiring the water back into the environment. So those combined methods help to cool the surface temperatures significantly in an urban environment. And many of us who grow in an urban environment use raised beds because of the soil. And in those raised beds, I know we do as what's called an intensive gardening method, where we grow the plants closer together. And so you get much more of that soil coverage from the leaves because the plants are so close together. Not only helps to prevent a lot of weeds to grow in between the plants because the sunlight's not penetrating the soil, but it also maintains a much cooler temperature in the soil. And my very unscientific way of proving this is our dog, Jake, who on very hot days tries to dig his way through the plants and in particular our sweet potato vines, where it is nice and cool and nice and dense, and he likes to lay there and cool off on the hot days. Again, no surprise that our air quality in the city is poor, as in most major cities, and also no surprise that that poor quality of air is largely due to vehicle and building emissions, large industrial buildings. We know that there are a number of compounds that are hazardous in the air, including carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, sulfur oxides, carbon dioxides, and we also know that nitrous oxides up to 100% or 100 times that of non-urban areas have been measured in the city. Ozone obviously is another problem. It's particularly problematic in the city because of the extreme heat in the cities. The ozone layers can be 10 times higher than again in the surrounding areas. Particulate matter also in the form of dust and other pollutants are carried through the air. All of these contribute to a 2% annual death rate from poor air quality. And they also contribute to chronic lung problems, COPD, asthma. And Philadelphia, unfortunately, is the 12th most polluted city, according to the American Lung Association. And again, these problems affect those who are the most vulnerable, people who cannot escape the poor quality of air by going inside because they may not have air conditioning or fans, and so are much more susceptible to the poor air quality. What can urban agriculture do? Trees can reduce 60% of the particulate matter. That from a report from the Urban Forestry Network. Urban park, there was an urban park that it looked at, showed that trees can remove 448 pounds of carbon monoxide and 100 pounds of cadmium daily. They also found that one sugar tree along a roadway can remove 60 milligrams of cadmium, 140 milligrams of chromium, 820 milligrams of nickel, and over 5,000 milligrams of lead from the environment in one growing season. Green roofs help reduce air pollutants and remove dangerous gases from the air. There's a project in Chicago involving green roof production, found that as many as over 2,000 metric tons of air pollutants would be removed if intensive green roofs were planted in Chicago. Community gardens obviously release oxygen in the air. And then there's also the concept of eating locally. So by eating locally, we are reducing the carbon dioxide that's emitted when produce is transported from long distances. The United Nations estimates that 30% of the food that's produced worldwide is wasted. Now, most of that, or much of that waste is produced during processing and transporting and storage, but a large part of it is wasted because of imperfections or non-uniformity. And we know, those of us who grow and eat locally, that not only do we eat the less than perfect food, but we often take much pride in how that food looks. So just a few other, real quickly, other benefits of urban agriculture, biodiversity. These are pictures that we took on the farm. We see in the city swallowtail butterflies that we haven't seen before. We also this year have started planting wild sunflowers, and we have goldfinches now that people in the community have never seen before. The community pride that comes and cohesion that comes from planting in the community. The folks in this area really take a lot of pride in what we're doing and readily come out and participate. We do a lot of environmental education, so really trying to teach the next generation the importance of the earth in a variety of different ways. The picture on the right are kids who are handling a male bee, which doesn't sting, and for the first time ever. We also teach, we mentioned before about after school programs and summer programs. This is a picture of kids that are looking close up at this tomato hornworm that's being parasitized by the eggs of a parasitic wasp, and understanding sort of the symbiotic nature of the environment. One of the really fascinating things that happened early on is we discovered this yellow garden spider, and the kids in the city right away wanted to kill it. And so we had a large discussion around the benefits of spiders in the garden and why we don't want to kill it, and how it traps other insects that we might not want there that might be harmful. And then one by one, as other kids came in, the two kids that we had talked to brought the other kids up to this spider, showed them the spider, and then proceeded to educate them about the benefits of the spider and why they shouldn't kill it. So, the kids really are learning a lot, the adults are learning a lot, and as they learn and take pride and ownership in the land that they're growing on, they're more likely to care for it in a variety of different ways. So why urban agriculture? Well, it helps to heal our land, it helps to heal our water, our air, and our communities. So thank you very much. And I'll leave this slide up. I know we're going to try to take some questions now. I'll leave this slide up if anyone wants to contact me outside of this talk. My phone number's on there, our website's on there, and that's email that you can get me at directly as well. So any questions?
Thanks so much, Andrea. That was super informative. We do have some questions in the chat here. Alex would like to know that this was in reference to the sunflowers taking toxins out of the soil. If you then have to landfill the plants after they grow and bind the toxins, like what happens to that plant material?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that, but I would love to find that out myself. I really don't know. I do know that the plants are used to capture that. My guess is because they're using that in phyto remediation, that there probably is some chemical conversion that's happening inside the plant itself that is reducing the toxicity of those chemical contaminants. That would be my guess. But again, that's just sort of an educated guess. I don't know that for a fact, however.
We have another question. If I wanted to turn a vacant lot owned by the city into a mini farm with my neighbors, how would I go about getting legal access to use that lot?
Well, are you ready for an entire another seminar? So I would say that person who posed that question, contact me directly. There's actually lots of ways to do that. the most obvious and direct route would be to contact the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, which really is sort of the leading agency in in Philadelphia for helping to convert lots and then supporting those urban gardens in a number of different ways through seedlings, seeds, soil, fertilizers, wood for raised beds. So that's sort of your entry point, but it's a little more complicated than that, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody offline. There's a lot of information around that, and perhaps someday we can do a seminar on that as well. But yeah, feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to talk to you.
Great. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of interest around that process. And then we have one more question. How much clean fill do you have to obtain for these projects? Are you able to get companies to make charitable contributions?
So we plant in 1 foot raised bed gardens, and before we put the soil in, we put a layer of landscape fabric down so that the roots are staying essentially in the boxes. And 1 foot of good, healthy, good quality soil is really all you need to grow vegetables cleanly. And we've done foliar analyses of the leaves of the plants that we grow, and we're not finding any contaminants in that. And obviously we're testing our soil as well, and we're not finding any contaminants seeping into that soil. It would be really interesting, and maybe before we convert our next lot over to all urban community garden, to measure the contaminants, the heavy metals in the soil at year 0, and then after maybe 5 to 10 years of gardening and adding compost and various organic matter, to then measure that soil again and see what the contaminants are. And I'm not talking about the soil that we're growing in, but rather the soil sort of between the beds. Because even between the beds, you're getting organic matter put down. At least that's how we do it every year between the beds to keep the leaves down. So the years of that organic matter building up and seeping down into the soil and aerating the soil and cleaning the soil, it'd be really interesting to see what those 2 figures are after 5 or 10 years.
We have another question. How has the farm changed as you got more and more connected to the neighborhood that the farm is in?
Well, I would say just in general, the neighborhood has changed us more than we have changed the neighborhood. And I mean that very sincerely. The mission statement that I put up at the beginning is a new mission statement. And I can tell you that those of us who started and are working intensely on this project have done quite a bit and continue to do quite a bit of soul searching around racial justice, racial inequities, Black Lives Matter movement. And so, we're looking at, how can we be more racially just? How can we really examine our own sort of white privilege, and what does it mean for us as, largely white people in this neighborhood? And how can we really listen to the people in the community and eventually really turn this over to folks in the community and make it theirs. And so I would say that's one sort of, kind of intangible way that it has changed, but in very tangible ways, wow. I mean, I think people have really grown to claim this as their own. We have more and more people that come to our food stand every week. I think we had a record the other day of, I think maybe 50 or close to 50 people coming to the stand. And it's harder and harder to feed that many people. So we're really trying to grow in terms of the space that we have, but also in terms of the way that we farm and do more intensive farming and get more out of the land that we can. But as I mentioned before, it's really about holistic healing. And so we want to partner with the community. We want to really learn from the community. And it has, I think personally, it's impacted me. You know, as a nurse practitioner, I said earlier, I worked with marginalized communities my entire career, but was always in the sort of sterile environment of an exam room. And, you know, I thought after all that time that I kind of got it, you know, and I understand what people are experiencing. And then now having worked out in the community itself, walking along the sidewalks, listening to the gunshots and hearing people talk firsthand about some of their struggles, it has profoundly changed me, and I know changed the people that work with me. I love it. I love the people, and it's a really. I think I would encourage anybody that's out there to come and volunteer with us. I think we're doing, and I don't say this to pat myself on the back or anything. I say it kind of humbly, but I think all of us together, including the community members who are involved, are doing some amazing things for the community. And it's a very different way of doing community gardening. We look at it as sort of a cooperative experience, and we want everybody to participate and get as much out of it as possible.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That brings us to our hour. I really appreciate you taking time with us this Saturday, Andrea, to tell us about this amazing project and educate us about environmental justice and urban agriculture, and everybody who spent some of their Saturday here learning about it. It's super important stuff. Again, Greenfest Philly still has some programming throughout this evening and tomorrow. We're presented by Toyota Hybrids, and tomorrow we have a great webinar about hybrid vehicles. You can check out all of our events at cleanair.org/Greenfest. All right, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.